Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're venturing into the world of Adasaurus, a really interesting dinosaur from ancient Mongolia.
Yeah, quite an enigmatic one.
Absolutely. We've got a stack of scientific papers here, including one key study that really changed how we see this creature, plus some other great paleontological findings.
Hmm.
Our mission today is basically to figure out what makes Adasaurus stand out from its relatives, especially when you look at that peculiar sickle claw it had.
That claw is definitely a talking point.
It really is. Okay, let's just jump right in with the name itself, Adasaurus. It means evil lizard. Evil lizard. What's the story there? What made it seem so, I don't know, sinister?
Ha! Yeah, that name does grab your attention, doesn't it? And it kind of hints at some of the puzzles surrounding Adasaurus that scientists are still digging into.
Okay.
So, to set the scene a bit, the first time it sort of appeared in scientific writing was 1977. That was thanks to the Mongolian paleontologist Rinchen Barsbold.
Ah, Barsbold, a big name.
A very big name. He then formally named and described it in 1983. And the main fossils we have, the holotype and the paratype, they both came from the Nemegt Formation in Mongolia.
Right. Gobi Desert again.
Exactly, specifically a place called Bugin Sav. And the species name, mongoliensis, well, that obviously points straight to Mongolia.
Makes sense. Mongolia, just such a hot spot for these discoveries. Now,
Yeah.
you mentioned puzzles, and early on, Barsbold noted something pretty unusual about Adasaurus, didn't he? Something about its foot.
He did. He highlighted this notably reduced second pedal ungul.
Okay, break that down for us.
That's the sickle claw, the iconic, big, sharp, curved claw you see on Velociraptor and other dromaeosaurs.
Yeah, the killing claw.
Well, Adasaurus seemed to have a version that was much smaller, less prominent.
Huh. So, not so much of a killing claw then. And wasn't there even some, debate about whether that little claw actually belonged to Adasaurus?
That's right, yeah, it got a bit complicated. In 2010, paleontologist Phil Center looked at the evidence and questioned if that specific small claw really belonged with the main holotype specimen. Sometimes fossils get mixed up.
Right, it happens.
But then a couple of years later, in 2012, Turner and his colleagues did a really thorough review. They looked closely at everything again.
And what did they find?
They basically addressed Center's concerns and reaffirmed that, yes, the reduced sickle claw is a genuine feature of Adasaurus. It wasn't a mix-up.
Okay.
And that view has pretty much held up since then. So that smaller claw is real, and it's pretty significant. It really sets Adasaurus apart.
Okay, so the small claw mystery is settled. It had a small claw.
Mhm.
Now, if it didn't have this big weapon on its foot, what else do we know? What did Adasaurus actually look like, size-wise?
Well, based on the holotype, that's the main specimen. Probably an adult, we estimate it was around 2.39 meters long.
So about, what, 7.8 feet?
Yeah, about that. And weight-wise, maybe somewhere around 36.5 kilograms, so roughly 80 pounds.
Okay, not huge, but respectable.
Definitely. Now, there's also the paratype specimen, which seems a bit bigger based on its foot bones. That might suggest an individual reaching maybe 3.5 meters or 11 feet and weighing closer to 87 kilos, like 192 pounds.
Ah, so some size variation, or maybe just a larger individual still, sort of a medium-sized predator for its
Well,
time.
exactly.
So beyond that foot claw, what other physical traits defined Adasaurus? What are the key anatomical markers?
Okay, yeah. Besides the claw, there are several other skeletal details paleontologists look for. One is an expanded bit, a projection on the maxillary bone that's part of the upper jaw.
Okay.
It also had a recurved lacrimal bone that's near the eye socket. And what's interesting there is that we see a similar feature in Austroraptor, a dromaeosaur from South America.
Huh. Suggesting maybe some connection or similar skull mechanics?
Potentially, yeah. Or convergent evolution. Then the lower jaw had this noticeable hole, the syringular foramen, and a bone in the jaw joint, the quadrate, had this sort of irregular triangular bump on it.
Lots of skull details.
Hmm. And moving back along the spine, the sacral vertebrae, the ones fused in the hip area, the front ones had pluricoles.
Hair sacs, right,
Yeah.
like in birds, to
Yeah.
lighten the skeleton.
Precisely. And then looking at the hip bone itself, the ilium, the front edge of its upper blade, was relatively short compared to some relatives. These might sound like small details, but they add up to a unique picture.
They really do. And what actual bones do we have that show all this? How complete are the fossils?
The holotype is pretty decent. We have parts of the skull, though, sadly not the front. The snout is missing. There's a right scapulocoracoid.
Shoulder blade and coracoid fused together.
Yep, a sternal plate from the chest. We've got vertebrae from the neck, the back, the hip region, and the tail. Some hind limb bones, including a right foot, and a nearly complete right side of the pelvis.
That's quite a bit to work with. And the paratype?
Less complete. Mainly some tail vertebrae and another nearly complete right foot, the one that suggests the larger size.
Okay. Do we have measurements, like leg bones?
We do for the holotype. The femur, the thigh bone, is about 27.3 centimeters. The tibia, the main shin bone, is a bit longer at 30.3 centimeters.
Interesting proportions. What does that suggest? Longer, lower leg, maybe some agility?
It could, yeah. Those limb proportions often give clues about locomotion, whether it was built more for speed or strength.
Right. So we have a decent picture of the skeleton. Now, let's talk family tree. Where does Adasaurus sit? It's a dromaeosaurid, you said, like Velociraptor.
Yes, definitely a dromaeosaurid. That puts it in the group of bird-like theropods, often called raptors. Now, initially, because it had some features that seemed a bit robust, some researchers placed it in the subfamily Dromaeosaurinae.
That's the group with the really stocky ones, like Dromaeosaurus itself or Utah Raptor.
Exactly, the more heavy-duty members. But, as we found more fossils and refined our analyses, the thinking has shifted.
How so?
More recent studies, looking closely at all the features, tend to place Adasaurus within the Velociraptorinae instead.
Ah, Velociraptorinae. So closer to Velociraptor itself.
Precisely. The Velociraptorians are generally seen as the more lightly built, maybe more gracile dromaeosaurs. Think Velociraptor, of course, and other Asian forms like Sagan or Linhoraptor. We have pretty good skulls for those.
Oh, okay.
But I should add, the exact membership list for Velociraptorinae, well, it's still debated. Different analyses sometimes shuffle things around a bit. Paleontology is always evolving.
Always tweaking the family tree.
Pretty much. But yeah, analyses like the one by Napoli and colleagues in 2021 consistently put Adasaurus right there in Velociraptorinae, even though some older studies might have put it elsewhere.
Okay, so currently it's generally seen as a Velociraptorine. But let's get back to that really unique feature, the small sickle claw. What does that mean? Why have a claw that's so underwhelming compared to its relatives?
Yeah, that's the core question, isn't it? Having that second toe claw, the one that's so iconic in its cousins, but making it so much smaller and, frankly, blunter. It's really weird.
It is.
Back in 2006, Kubota and Barsbold looked at this. They suggested that maybe this reduction meant Adasaurus just didn't use that claw as much, or used it differently.
How did they figure that?
They pointed out that the bone just before the claw, the penultimate phalanx, it lacks these specific asymmetrical ridges on the underside.
Okay.
Those ridges are usually linked to the strong gripping and maybe raking movements you'd expect if the claw was being used really actively, like for grappling prey.
Ah, I see. So the lack of those ridges suggests less intense use, maybe.
That was their thinking, yeah. If you're not constantly using it for heavy-duty grappling, maybe those specific bony supports don't develop as strongly.
Makes sense. How does this square with ideas like the raptor prey restraint model? That model kind of depends on a big claw, doesn't it?
It really does. The RPR model, proposed by Fowler and his team in 2011, suggests dromaeosaurs might have jumped onto prey, used their body weight to pin it down, and then used those big sickle claws to grip on tight, maybe even pierce vital areas while they started feeding, kind of like modern hawks or eagles.
Right, pinning the prey down.
Exactly. And that model really relies on having a large, sharp, effective claw for that initial grip and restraint. Adasaurus's smaller, blunter claw just doesn't seem well suited for that specific behavior.
So it probably wasn't doing the RPR thing.
It seems unlikely, or at least not in the same way as, say, Deinonychus might have. It suggests Adasaurus had maybe a different hunting strategy altogether. Maybe it went after different prey or subdued it differently.
Maybe more agile chasing or focusing on smaller animals. What other ideas are out there about claw function?
Well, Peter Bishop did some interesting biomechanical modeling in 2019. He looked mainly at Deinonychus, but considered dromaeosaur claws more broadly.
What did the model suggest?
His work suggested the claws generally might not have been great for powerful slashing attacks, despite the movie depictions.
Oh.
Yeah. Instead, he proposed they were maybe better suited for restraining prey and delivering more focused stabbing or piercing attacks, especially at close quarters with the leg flexed.
Okay, so less slashing, more gripping and stabbing.
Kind of. But crucially, Bishop also noted that claw function could easily have varied between different species, and he specifically mentioned Adasaurus with its unique small claw, saying it's really unclear if its claw had lost the typical function or evolved some kind of modified one.
So the jury's still out on exactly what it was doing with that claw. Maybe something more subtle.
Could be. It really highlights that dromaeosaurs weren't all doing the exact same thing. There was likely a diversity of hunting styles within the group.
Fascinating. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Where did this potentially less stabby evil lizard live? What was its world like?
Adasaurus comes from the late Cretaceous Nemic Formation. We're talking late Campanian to early or maybe middle Maastrichtian age, so roughly 70 to 68 million years ago.
The very end of the dinosaur era, basically.
Pretty close, yeah.
Yeah.
And the environment, based on the geology, it looks like it was a landscape with rivers, streams, muddy floodplains, shallow lakes.
Sounds quite wet. Lots of water around.
Definitely. And likely quite lush with vegetation, too, based on the sediments and the herbivores found there. These river systems were probably really important, like oases, especially for smaller dinos, like Raptorosaurs, maybe.
Sounds like a vibrant place to live.
Yeah.
Who else was around? Who were Adasaurus's neighbors?
Oh, the Nemegd is famous for its dinosaur diversity. You had ostrich mimics, the ornithomosaurs like Anserimus and Gallimimus, and others we haven't named yet.
Fast runners.
Yep. Lots of different oviraptorosaurs, too. Nemegtomea, Elmosaurus, Goboraptor, the troodontid Zanabazar, and then the bigger guys.
Go on.
The really strange Dinocaris with those huge arms, the duck-billed Hadrosaur Saurolophus, the top predator, the Tyrannosaur Tarbosaurus.
Yeah, the Turbosaurus, the big boss.
Definitely the apex predator there, and also the bizarre long-clawed herbivore Therizinosaurus.
Wow, what a lineup. So Adasaurus was navigating this world with giants and other predators all around.
Exactly. And being a medium-sized predator, maybe with a less specialized weapon, it might have carved out a niche focusing on different prey than Tarbosaurus, or maybe using different tactics, speed, agility, perhaps.
Makes you wonder.
Yeah.
Now, one last detail from the sources I want to touch on.
Yeah.
There was some early talk about the main specimen, the holotype, being pathological, like maybe it was sick or injured.
Yes, that came up. Back in '97, and again in 2004, Norell and Makovicki suggested some features, especially in the pelvis, might look a bit unusual, maybe due to injury or disease. But again, that big 2012 review paper by Turner and colleagues looked at this specifically. They re-examined the bones very carefully.
And they disagreed.
They did. Their conclusion was that the features weren't pathological. They weren't signs of sickness or injury. Instead, they suggested some things, like the way the foot bones, the metatarsals, were fused at their upper ends, might just indicate that this particular Adasaurus was quite old when it died.
So features of old age, not disease.
That was their interpretation, yes. So maybe not a sick lizard, just a senior citizen lizard.
Good to clear that up. Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive into Adasaurus. Let's just quickly recap the main points.
Sure. So we've seen Adasaurus as this really distinct dromaeosaurid from late Cretaceous Mongolia. Its standout feature is that puzzlingly reduced sickle claw.
Right.
Its classification has shifted, but it's now generally considered a velociraptorine, a relative of Velociraptor, and there's still ongoing research trying to figure out its biology, especially the function of that unique claw.
And that name, evil lizard. We didn't find a definitive reason why Barsbold chose it, did we?
No, the papers don't spell it out. It remains a bit speculative.
But maybe, considering its unique features living alongside giants like Carbosaurus, perhaps that smaller claw hinted at something different, a different kind of cleverness or evil way of surviving.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. It certainly makes you wonder.
It does. And maybe that's our final thought for you, the listener. Given that Adasaurus didn't have the typical big sickle claw, what other adaptations might it have evolved? How did it hunt? How did it defend itself in that complex Nemegd ecosystem?
Yeah, what other secrets does this evil lizard of the Gobi still hold? There are definitely unanswered questions waiting for the next fossil discovery.